If this is your first time, welcome, a warm welcome. If you've been here before, thanks for coming back. Before we go on, we need to we're giving our sponsors a 2-minute slot because they make it happen. They make Lead Sharp happen the way it is now. So we thought we'd give them a bit of time before we start. So, Fran.
Hi guys, I'm Fran from Fruition IT Recruitment. So we've been sponsoring Lead Sharp for quite a while now. But as Matt said, I thought I'd kind of introduce myself to you. Basically, this is very not what I'm used to at all. I'm normally on the phone speaking to one dev, so this is very out of my comfort zone, just to FYI. But yeah, so I've been at Fruition now for about a year and a half. And basically I work the .NET market. So not only do I come to kind of Lead Sharp for to meet people, but for me it's a way of learning. When I was at university, I did a degree in BI, Business and Information Technology. So I did HTML, CSS, PHP, SQL. So yes, granted it's not the .NET tech stack, but it is, it's a little bit of tech in there. So hopefully when I'm speaking to you guys, you don't think I'm kind of a typical recruiter that's talking nonsense. But following Lead Sharp, I always try and kind of do a blog where I talk about like what the talk was on, and I just kind of do it so people that can't attend know what the event's about, and then also it's for people that maybe not as techy as you guys. But that's posted on our website and on our LinkedIn if you want to check that out. And I also always get some sort of contribution from you guys as well, so help me out with that, which I really appreciate. Basically, the reason why I wanted to kind of talk was to say that, as Fruition IT and as myself, we want to make a commitment to you guys. So I want to be kind of like a go-to person that you can go to for support, or if you want help with anything, and offer you guidance regardless of whether you're kind of looking for a role or not. By that, just offering advice in general if you're interested in what the market is at the moment, whether that's perm or contract. If you want to kind of benchmark your salary to find out if you're being paid what you should be paid, because you guys are smart enough to know that you should be paid a decent salary. And also, if you're interested in going contracting, when you've been a permanent guy for a long time, you want to potentially consider going into the contracting market. So I just want you guys to feel that you can approach me and be able to kind of talk to me about any sort of opportunities, whether you're looking or not. And I feel like me coming here today, I can kind of commit that to you guys. So yeah, so thank you.
Cheers, Fran. It's really nice to put a face to the sponsor, and by the way, we always go to brewery taps, and it's always really good to have a couple of beers and chat afterwards. So make sure you go. Hopefully you'll have time afterwards after the talks. We've got a full program. We've got 2 talks lined up. So we usually have a couple of sections, like a news section or something like that, and we've got this new section because we've got mugs to give away.
Where are the mugs?
Yeah, here. Good. Here we go. There you go. Nice premium coffee mug. Woo! So you can be the first one to get one of these mugs.
How are we winning mugs?
Yeah, they'll probably turn out to be pretty rare, and they'll go for millions on eBay. So we thought we'd do a section called Kaizen Bits, which is that if you know anything about Kaizen, it's just
gradual improvement.
Yeah, exactly.
Continual improvement.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be like it's not meant to be intimidating or anything, but it's when you've had the privilege of pair programming, and your partner does something that you're like, oh, I didn't know about that, and you may be a bit embarrassed that you didn't know about it, but it's a really good, like just a shortcut or something like that, or like a design pattern, stuff like that. unfortunately, no one's tweeted it.
Also, we're asking for beforehand.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I'll
So
tweet
in
it out.
preparation for next month then. So
In preparation for next month, if you tweet at Lead Sharp, that'll be the pizzas.
do I need to go and get pizzas?
Yes, please.
Where are they? In the.
So if you tweet it and we read it out, you get a mug. So a bit like .NET Rocks kind of thing. But it's just really useful because it's just little things like I don't know, Control Alt L goes to the file that in ReSharper goes to the file that you're looking at, kind of thing. I didn't know that until I was pair programming with someone, I like to think I'm quite savvy with ReSharper shortcuts. So it doesn't have to be like out there, like this is going to make you a huge developer. So if you could do that, then you're in for a mug if you want, and that'd be nice. Anyway, so I don't know how we're going to give away the first one. Have you got any ideas? Maybe you can ask a question after your talk or something like that. So anyway, so I've got 2 talks lined up, 2 really good talks. The first one is on Monolith and microservices. I'm surprised that it's it's been going for about 2 or 3 years. It's still a topic. I know in meetings no one dares mention microservices anymore because it's such a buzzword these days. It's like, all right, let's just call it services. But anyway, Callum Whyte is going to give a great talk on it, and he works for a company called Cogworks. Yeah. So if you Cogworks is the Umbraco company to go to in the UK, I would say, because I've dealt with them and I know there's a lot of talent there. So let's start the talk.
All right. Okay. Hi, I'm Callum. It's really great to be here, and there's so many of you. This is a really good turnout for a meetup. I've given this talk the title "From Monolithic Monster to Majestic Microservice App" because it's really, really difficult to say. So I thought I'd give myself a bit of a challenge. I've given this talk a couple of times at a few DDD events around the UK. Yeah. Who am I? I'm a senior developer at the Cogworks. The Cogworks are an Umbraco specialist. We'd like to think we're the best in the UK.
You are.
Thank you. So I'm quite an active community member in not only Umbraco but open source generally. I'm currently on a 52 pull request challenge, 1 a week. It's not going as well as I'd like. Maybe it was overly ambitious. I work on packages, plugins, open source stuff. I also do a ton of meetups, conferences, and I have a live YouTube series that I do every Friday where my colleague and I have a coffee and we chat about what's happened in the week, called Umbra Coffee. If you want to watch it,
wow,
please do. I also organise a conference, the Umbraco UK Festival. There is an obligatory slide about who we are, but we are digital experts essentially. We have designers, we have UX people, content people, we do everything. But our primary focus is with the .NET, open source, CMS, and Umbraco. We have not a huge team, really. Kind of 10 developers. We're split across London and Krakow. We have a few remote people as well. Some content editors, some project managers. And we have some pretty big clients too. A really diverse range of clients, I'd like to say. Some travel-focused ones like Trainline and the CAA and some store models or some healthcare brands as well. So really, really diverse.
Do you get paid in condoms?
No, but if you go to their office, they have a massive bucket of them. Yeah, anyway, now this kind of seems like one of those wanky, oh, here's who we are slides, but a lot of this information I've just told you has quite a lot of importance to my talk, and I think you'll find out why. I'm going to start by saying what this talk is not about. Microservices are a buzzword. People love to talk about Docker and Kubernetes and containers and all of that other rubbish. I'm also not really going to tell you kind of best practice for microservices. As a disclaimer, we haven't been doing this very long, maybe about a year. We are a digital agency, primarily building websites. We don't build systems and other things. I think we would typically be building what you would maybe refer to as a monolith in our applications.
By the way, we had a talk on Kubernetes, I think last month.
Well, it's awesome, but I'm not here to evangelize it. In fact, I think you could almost say this talk's not going to be too technical. I don't want to dive into implementation. What I really want to discuss is the process that we went to refactor an application from this horrible, disgusting .NET monolith to lots of little components using Azure. I'm using Azure because it's something we're familiar with. I'll give examples using Azure tools and also with .NET, but they're probably applicable to any stack that you want to choose. We'll discuss the different patterns we used. We'll discuss our journey and kind of the impact that had on our team as a digital agency, not a product-focused team. So I'll start with the story. Hampton Medical is a mobile app. It's designed for, and I think I have a slide for this, the official statement. Yes. It's an innovative home monitoring app for patients with hypertension and subsequently at risk of preeclampsia during pregnancy. If you don't know what that means, essentially women during pregnancy need to track their blood pressure, and they need to call up their GP and tell them, these are my blood results, or these are my the amount of blood I have in my urine at the moment. They have to do these tests to make sure that they're healthy and safe. This costs GP surgeries a lot of time and money because someone has to be available to answer calls and record the things and maybe book an appointment if someone has an issue. This app was designed to alleviate some of that cost. I think it costs something like 2/3 less than just calling up the doctor. You put the readings into the app, submits it to your doctor directly. If there's an issue, it flags it, and there's a whole workflow behind that. There's a look to expanding into other conditions as well, beyond blood pressure tracking in women. We can do diabetes tracking, we can do mental health tracking, and a ton of other things as well. So there's quite a big scope for this. The goal is to be in every NHS hospital in the UK this year. We've got NHS backing, so that's awesome. How is the app built? The app, when we first came across this project, was built in Objective-C or Swift for iOS, and was also in Java. It had like an AngularJS powered web portal that had a web API backing it that was written in .NET, and it used a SQL database. So it was nothing too unfamiliar to us, really. They came to us in the October of last year. One of the founders of this app was a friend of the director of my company, and he said, we need a bit of help. We've got ourselves into a slightly sticky situation. We had this great concept, but we outsourced it to Lithuania, to a company. We paid them £7,000 to build us a mobile app for iOS, Android, the database, the API, the back end. You kind of see where this is going. There was some conversation about them chucking a bit more money, and okay. We need this to launch in every NHS hospital by Christmas. Or I think they said 5 was their target. They had a load of features they wanted to add to, such as improving the UI, fixing a few bugs, and building a way of licensing. They didn't have that yet. So we were like, okay, sounds good. Let's do this. How hard can it be? Well, as you probably would do if you're taking on a code base you're unfamiliar with, I did a review of that code base. Decided to sit down, find out what its problems were, note down areas that maybe we needed to improve later on or that we just need to be cautious of. This is really valuable because when the client calls you up at crunch time and goes, something's broken, and we go, we've no idea what you're talking about. It's very, very difficult. It makes a relationship very, very difficult. We kind of had to consider how we were going to maintain this thing. We didn't want to be called up in the middle of the night going, it's broken, and not be able to do anything. So I took a look under the covers. And as you can probably guess, it wasn't good. This native mobile app was not a native mobile app at all. In fact, if you're familiar with mobile development at all, it's a web view. So it's an iframe in web terms. It was loading in a web page into this shell of an app. So actually, if we wanted to make changes, then we'd have to change the website instead. That was okay, but we realized both apps had different elements of, some of them were actually native components and some of them were web components, and if we wanted to make any kind of changes, this was going to be a mess. Furthermore, the API project was one of the most complicated things I think I've ever seen for something that's ultimately 20 different web API endpoints. It was running on the free AWS Windows tier, which, considering they wanted to scale out to every NHS hospital, was going to be a bit of a problem. It was just a VM running a SQL box running IIS. Bit of a pain. They hadn't really used any patterns for architecting their code, other than maybe crack-driven development, if I had to guess. It was really difficult to test the code, so for something kind of critical where we need to make sure the functionality is going to be working, it was very difficult to put tests on top and ensure that we weren't going to break anything. There was some unsecure API endpoints that I found, such as, there's an endpoint to go and get a list of patients that I control, and that's protected, but if I want to get a list of every patient in the system, that's public. And so this wasn't really ready for the prime time. It wasn't going to scale. And to top this all off, the code we were given didn't even work. It was different to the code that was on production. It took a month just to get the actual code out of the agency, and even then, it just wasn't right. And I'm going to show you it just for a bit of a laugh. Damn. So it's just a Visual Studio solution. Can I zoom that in? Maybe. No. For those that can see, I'll describe if you can't. There is 4 projects in this Visual Studio solution. They are all websites. I'm not sure why. We have app models, we have app MVC, which I discovered is unused and doesn't do anything. We have this API project, which contains the kind of the web layers, all the stuff that's presentational, and EntityDB, which is their equivalent of a data layer. It's a website, I don't know why. It's following, it's an MVC application, so they've got controllers, and if we just dive into one of those, let's take the first one, the account controller. You'll just see how many references there are there to different libraries, and half of them aren't even used. If we scroll down, you'll realize just how massive this code is, and it really doesn't do anything special. It's just creating,
extra work.
We're at 1,200 lines for one file. That's the first file I just showed you. Imagine that. Every single other file in this project is exactly the same. Or maybe not that one. This one is exactly the same. You can't understand it. There's like horrible link queries everywhere. They're using entity framework, but not really doing it very well. They were just pulling tons of stuff out of the database. It's a mess. So, we took on a project with a load of unknowns, with completely unmaintainable code. And it was kind of this monolithic monster. We didn't know what to do with it. Where do we go from here? I'll ask this to the audience. What would you do if you were given this situation? Throw it in the bin. So again,
Nuke it from orbit. But do a ridiculously high estimate quote on
Well, yes. So, I shared my findings with the bosses. I had to be brutally honest because this was just not going to work. We couldn't go with it. Do we take it on? Do we completely rewrite it? Do we just say, no, it's too risky, we're not getting involved at all? As you may guess by the title of this talk, we did take it on, and we learned quite a lot from it. So, this new beginning. You may remember the slides I showed you earlier. It was a very different UI. We freshened it up. The design team got to work. They came up with new concepts for everything that they wanted Hampton to be. We thought about the future. We thought about everything that the client wanted. We thought about maybe where we could take it further and introduce AI and other more advanced things. We defined exactly what the app was. And I think you'll agree it looks much nicer now. And a nice web portal too. So what do we do with all this legacy? We've redesigned this thing, but we need to somehow get our new design in there and get it to meet their goals. We needed to quickly get the app to a point where it was going to do everything we needed it to do. We also needed to mitigate that risk. We didn't want to be called up on Christmas Day going, something's broken, which actually did happen. Their SSL certificate ran out on Christmas Day. I was the guy that fixed it. So our approach, we decided that the front-end portal was not that bad. The code was pretty straightforward, it's kind of clean, JavaScript. It was pretty easy. As it was a web view, we could update all of that, and a lot of the changes would pull through into the app as well. We weren't too worried about it. We aren't iOS developers. We're not Android developers. But we do know .NET. So we settled on using Xamarin because we could build a cross-platform app that would work on iOS, Android, tablets, whatever we wanted. The reason we decided to do this was because parts of these apps were hard-coded they weren't part of the web view, so we couldn't easily change them. And if we suddenly run into bugs and other problems, we're going to have to be able to maintain those. So bringing the code into a format or a language that we understand a bit better was a really smart move. It also allowed us to implement this new design. We also decided to move them off AWS. Now this might be slightly controversial. I'm sure there may be some AWS fans in the room. We personally feel most comfortable using Azure, and we had to feel comfortable supporting this application. So we suggested them that they go there. There was also a few other reasons. Being a startup, they got a load of credits out of Microsoft, which was great. When we reviewed it at the time, we kind of felt that Microsoft's AI efforts were the best, and the services they were offering were the best, and we wanted to start introducing some of these things too. So that was a really natural place for us to go. The big thing we did was decide we were going to try and iteratively improve this thing. We couldn't justify just scrapping it. We had to try and build something around what we had to make it stable, to get it to where it needed to be. By us replacing those iOS and Android apps, we had inadvertently used something that I later found out was called the Strangler Pattern. We had taken a piece of legacy that we didn't know or understand or wanted to get rid of, and we had built it in something that we did understand and that we could maintain. The Strangler Pattern, for those that have never heard of, who's heard of it? A few people? Cool. So the earliest I can find this actually being coined as a term was by Martin Fowler, the wonderful Martin Fowler. His name might come up quite a bit. I've also got a link to the blog where he actually refers to this at the end. He describes how you kind of have reeds that hang from trees and they eventually strangle this tree and take over. And that's exactly what you want to do with your code, to surround legacy and bring in your new stuff. It's to iteratively rebuild existing functionality, or to add new features. There is two methods of doing that, which would be event capturing. So if you had an application that fired events, you could hook into those, and then you could perform your new event. Sadly, we didn't have events in our application because they didn't think of that. So the alternative is asset capturing. You have URLs, you have to hijack those and say, okay, previously this URL went to my application, but now the URL is going, my old application, but now it's going to my new version of the application. We needed to replace the API. We researched a few different things that we could do. and we settled upon a microservice-based architecture. There was big reasons for this. They needed to not only scale out in the UK, but scale out internationally. We needed to be able to enforce data sovereignty in places where they had to have all of their data and all of the processing done in a specific country. We needed a way of kind of in the background offloading things elsewhere. We didn't like the fact that this application was so, it was required to be up all the time and available all the time, but it was just this one big application that if we broke something, the whole thing comes crashing down and no one can give us these really important medical readings. So by splitting it out, we could have a little bit more resilience in our architecture too. It allows us to scale. It also allowed us to more easily start to strangle these bits of functionality. We could say this bit of the API is going to be replaced by this service going forward. This is a picture of 2 of the flows that we mapped out in our meeting room. Our meeting room was kind of half the size of this room. It had post-its on every single surface. We mapped everything out. It took many days. I think there was about 30 or 40 flows in total. We used this actually to identify the areas that we could improve on. We mapped out the flow as it was currently, but said, well, wait a second, that makes no sense. Let's do this properly. And we documented this and we shared it with the client and said, here is exactly what we're going to do. We also use this to kind of validate our knowledge of the application. Had we not done this, we'd have ended up with an understanding, gone down a road, and then the client would go, well, that's not how it's supposed to be. So this was really, really helpful.
How was the client? Were they on board with it?
Yeah, they were super on board with this. They kind of needed some technical direction. The previous agency had just gone away and delivered something that was crap. So they really liked the fact that we were hands-on. I'm not going to go into great detail on all of the different components because that would take hours, but we did identify some key areas of the application, things like authentication being one, and then there's subsections of that for logging in, registration, profiles, different roles and permissions. Subscriptions, which is something they didn't have but they wanted, so we started to bake that in to these plans, saying, okay, you've paid your money, so you're allowed to access the app. Things like logging is very important in a microservice architecture, taking readings, alerting, administration of the system as well. So there was a ton of things. We kind of, by splitting everything out into features, had already identified our core services and what those would be. It was a really natural thing for us to do. And as you would do, you say, oh, we're going to cut our teeth on something small and do this because we'd never done microservices before. Well, we chose authentication, which is not a small thing at all, but I'd identified that it was one of the most unperformant things in the entire application, was definitely not going to scale, definitely wasn't going to meet their needs. I also identified logging was a big issue. Previously, they had a database table that they logged absolutely every single HTTP request into, and as it was a Angular single page app, there was hundreds of web requests every time you loaded the site. So this table was hundreds of thousands of lines long, crawling. There was no indexes or anything on it. It was just crawling along. You couldn't query it. You couldn't do anything. Big bottleneck, was never going to help us scale. So we needed to replace that. And alerting was something new that they wanted. They wanted a way of sending push notifications and text messages and emails. So that was a way we could start to introduce a new piece of functionality. So replace something old, improve something that exists, and add something new. Designing our microservice architecture. I mentioned we use Azure. We decided every single thing in Azure should be its own resource, so we could turn them on and off, replace them easily. We built a whole deployment strategy around that. Unit tests become a first-class citizen. They have to be for this kind of application. And we need to have full trust in what we're building and what we're changing. So all of a sudden, every new piece of code we wrote had to be fully unit tested. The cloud-native and serverless approach was super appealing to us. They don't want to have to manage infrastructure. Now, this might be a problem if they grow, because I don't know what certain governments around the world are like with the security of these serverless services, but it was super important to us to not have to manage massive underlying infrastructure. I guess if we had at the time known we might have gone with something like Kubernetes. I mentioned it. There we go. That's it. We wanted to go with Azure Functions and Azure Service Bus as our kind of queue and our processing mechanisms where possible, or Azure Web Apps as well. This kept the costs super low as well. I think it costs like $10 a month basically to run this whole system, which is crazy.
Because of Azure Functions.
Because of Azure Functions, they cost next to nothing. Has anyone seen Troy Hunt's review of it cost me $9 to run Have I Been Pwned for 150 million users on Azure Functions. There was a fantastic article which I read just before we'd undertaken this journey. It was called A Microservices Implementation Journey, and it was a 2-part series when I read it. It's now like an 8-part series. It will change your life. Even if you're not doing microservices, it will make you reconsider how you architect your applications, and I have a lovely link to that later. Azure Functions, who's used them? Cool. Mix of people. If you haven't, then here's some equivalents. Amazon Lambda and Google Cloud Functions, which I'd never heard of. Anyone using Google Cloud? 1, 2, 3. Oh, a few people. That's cool. Azure Functions powers a lot of quite important things. I mentioned Have I Been Pwned already, but Domino's Pizza, delicious. The order and delivery process, every step of that, all of the logic behind it is in an Azure function, which is, you never know. ASOS as well, the same, they're kind of transactional stuff, all done in Azure Functions. The fact that a lot of big players have put confidence in that platform made us feel confident that, hey, yeah, we can do this too. Functions have a ton of different ways. For those that don't know, an Azure function is just like a small piece of code that runs only when required. You don't have to pay for a server to be sitting there constantly waiting. It's just there and you only pay for when it's running. Kind of, I think to the 100 milliseconds as well. You literally don't pay for it. A few different triggers for that could be a timer or a web API. When you hit a web API, it runs the code. There's storage-based things. Any kind of event you could think of, an Azure function can probably run off it. And the code is super clean if you're doing it in C#. So you can go and create a class and decorate it with this function attribute, and then just push it to Azure, and it runs and does what you need it to. Which I can quickly show you for the people that don't or have never used. Whoa, where's my mouse gone? Oh, that's the wrong. That's the wrong thing. That's why. Yeah, for those that have never used Azure Functions, or even on in Visual Studio and just done it through the portal. Damn. Here's how you can do it. So you can go into Visual Studio, you can create a new project, and there is an option now as of Visual Studio 2017 to just select Azure Function. When my computer plays game. So Azure Function, and you can choose the type of function you want based on all of those triggers I just mentioned, and it will bootstrap a class for you already with everything you need. So I just go in here and I add a new item, which will be by default an Azure function. Oh, it's not. Okay, an Azure function. Select it, it then gives me a dialog where I can just choose a trigger. Let's say I want it to be an HTTP trigger. Click OK, and boom, I have a class. I can put whatever code I want in there. It's just a web API. They're all. You can even run these as a console app. I may have a video of this, but I don't know. I think it's as easy as doing this. A nice console window pops up once it's built, and you can run your function locally. Oh, damn. Okay, I've screwed that up. Let's jump back to
and you
slides.
can push them easily up to
Yeah,
Azure.
just like you can deploy web apps, you can right-click on a resource and say deploy, and it goes straight up to Azure.
Do you bother going through the whole Team City
We
process
have
and
Team City and Octopus builds on every single thing
with Azure Functions?
with Azure Functions. So we decided we wanted to create this alerting functionality, but how are we going to integrate it? It doesn't exist currently in our application. We needed a way to get the legacy Monolith app to say, we want to trigger some bits of code over here. Oh, my slide's gone in a weird order. We decided we were going to create an Azure function to do all of our service, all of our alert service stuff, and that we were going to use a service bus to handle the messages and consume the data that we needed to. So, I'm annoyed that my slides have gone in a weird order. We added a small chunk of code to the monolith, which we wanted to avoid as much as possible, but this meant we could start to do whatever we wanted to do. This is just an example of kind of wiring up the Azure the Azure Service Bus SDK in .NET. You create a client, you send it as a message, and you give it an object. We defined this message as a standardized object that was going to be for every single thing we ever pushed to a service bus. The reason we chose a standardized message was because we needed to know which application sent it. It needed to have common headers so that every application would kind of expect the same format of data. This contains things like the version of the application that it came from, the name of the application that it came from, so we can trace problems, that sort of stuff. By doing this, we pushed our changes straight up to a service bus. Our function processed them, and then we were able to send alerts. I can very quickly show just how simple it was to send an alert back here with the same piece of code. The notification service is just a function class, and we have this process event method, and it's not the cleanest code in the world. We were learning. I think this is actually, I've not pulled the repo down in a long time, this is quite old, but it takes in a message from our service bus. It then checks to see property on that object and what that property is, and depending on that, it changes and it just sends an email out. We've since restructured some of the email sending into another service separately, but yeah, it was kind of a first step, building a piece of functionality next to an application and having one push data to the other seamlessly.
So this is an Azure function?
That is an Azure function. Yes. Okay. Whoa, what's happened? Now, the authentication service is a slightly different situation because that already existed. We needed a way of surrounding it and doing something special. We decided to use a .NET web app for that rather than an Azure function. The reason being, the logic was so complicated in the authentication service that actually it did need to be separate. We needed a way of we needed some kind of quite advanced libraries that weren't going to work on an Azure function, unfortunately. We decided to use Identity Server to build the foundation of our authentication mechanisms. We split it into 3 different services, so there was authentication for logging in, a profile service which was used for storing details about people, and then also a user service which was like your account record. We split these because not only were they distinct pieces of functionality, but actually we need to have data sovereignty on a lot of these things as well. So profile data is information about someone, and it's identifiable, it needs to be stored in their country of origin. We wrote it in .NET Core because I don't think there's any reason not to nowadays. We redesigned our database schema. We chose to use JOT tokens, JWT, if anyone's heard of those, JOT tokens, they're an RFC standard, if you're not aware. It's a way of storing an encrypted object or an encoded object and passing that around cleanly. It can have any data you want in it, but you need to have the key to actually get the data out. We didn't store anything identifiable in that other than kind of like user IDs or things that the application needed to identify someone, but this was our way of saying, okay, you've logged in, here's a token that you now use to authenticate. And that had all the details in it we needed in order to route them around our application and do what we needed to. We even included an ID so that we could identify where their data needed to be stored for compliance reasons. I'm not really going to go into how we implemented the auth service because I think that's an entire talk in itself, building like an authentication layer on Identity Server.
Are you going to come back and do that?
Yeah, I'll come back. But yeah, that was the gist of it. We built a bunch of services following a kind of consistent approach to how we wanted to do authentication, split them up into different Azure web apps, not functions, because they were just too complicated. And then we needed to find a way of integrating those into our application. If we come back to the kind of approaches I said earlier, we've got this event capture method to strangle a piece of functionality, or we've got this asset capture. We decided, okay, we don't have events, so we have to go find some way of saying, okay, this endpoint is now going to go to our endpoint. How are we going to do that? We need to hijack the API endpoints somehow. We needed some kind of proxy tool that would sit around the API and allow us to start doing that. It didn't exist. Nginx is a very, very powerful web server that has proxying built in. Or sorry, it's a proxy that you can do web server stuff with. Azure Functions has a proxy tool as well. That was really helpful. You can just supply like this URL equals this under the hood. It's really, really simple to set up, but we've kind of felt like we were wedding ourselves into a certain technology by doing that, and we'd probably pretty quickly hit a limit. I think it was in preview when we were trying this. We needed some kind of way of also routing conditionally within these things. If you go to a certain endpoint but you're from a certain country, your account is flagged as being from a certain country, we need to ensure that you're going to be routed internally to a service and a database in your country. We can't serve you data from like one data center in America. So we had to build this routing layer somehow. How would we do that? We could build some nice .NET wrapper around it, and that would all be lovely, right? Absolutely not, because just by wrapping this application in another .NET app, we're building another monolith. We're just moving bits around. We needed to find a different way of doing this. Who's used API Gateway in Azure? A few people. It's awesome. There's Amazon versions of this as well. But the gist of it is our service would look like this now. Our apps talk to an API gateway. The gateway handles all of the routing. Behind that sits our services. So we have an authentication service, which has the various different things. It lives on an Azure web app. Those communicate and they share a token. That token then gets shared to the user. And then the API gateway handles all the authentication to different services. So that might be you upload a new reading, well that goes straight through and updates, and it goes to an Azure function. It might be that you update your account and actually we route that to the auth service. We can control all of that straight through the API management gateway. I do have some interesting. Oh damn! I do have some interesting code snippets-ish to share. I guess. Can anyone see that?
Yeah, can you zoom out?
I can zoom that in. I think.
If you use Windows and Plus, you'll get the magnifier.
Windows and Plus, I'll get a magnifier.
And the first book goes to
That's good.
Definitely.
That is good. It's
that?
screwed up my other screen though. Yeah, if I. Can I do it in here? Oh, that's awful. Anyway, the API gateway allows you to define APIs or API endpoints as XML, which is horrible. I wish it was JSON or something else, but we're kind of stuck with it. Not only does it allow you to do that, but it allows you to put Razor or C#-esque syntax into these XML files. So you can say, oh, I'm going to build up a condition that's just a set of if statements. We use this to go and get values out of the token that we are passing around. So we have a field in there, like a JWT token. So we want to go, okay, from the variables we're passing around, get me the token, and we'll use then that to pass to the services we're calling underneath. I think you can, maybe, this thing's doing my head in.
Can I get the mic?
Yeah, this service here specifically was just calling a different endpoint to authorize, getting the value from that, and then within that we were doing some error handling. If it comes out of 401, report it, otherwise do some stuff in the background. Every API endpoint we needed to, we put through this. So all of a sudden we could route, the magnifier's there. All of a sudden we could route everything that was in our monolith through this. It made it super easy if we wanted to at any time swap something out to just do it by creating a bit of XML config, and it suddenly gets rooted out. The other great thing is this now gives us a gateway for deployment. When we deploy a change, we can say, okay, we're going to put that in. Oh crap, it's not worked. Well, we just reverse the config. We don't have to undo tons of other stuff. We've got this wrapper that now allows us all of the flexibility we needed. To summarize what we've just spoken about, because there's a lot of information I've just we took a really badly architected application and we tried to restructure it. We did so using .NET with Azure Functions and Identity Server and some .NET Core stuff as well. We wrapped everything in API gateway so we could hijack things, and we rebuilt our mobile app in Xamarin. We investigated all of the different issues, the kind of bottlenecks and everything, and tried to fix those as our priority. We didn't want to say, oh, this code's just badly written. We want to say this just isn't going to work, so we want to refactor it. We also decided that microservices was the way to go for them in the future. It wasn't maybe right at that point. They didn't have hundreds of thousands of users, but where they needed to scale it and wanted to scale it was microservices was the way to go. People may be familiar with the stories of Twitter and Netflix and Amazon and all the issues they had trying to rewrite their disgusting code bases to be microservices. The Twitter era with the fail whale, which was very, very common, was completely down to the fact that they had a badly architected application that just was crawling along. So we didn't want to end up having to re-architect something when it had like highly sensitive data going into it further down the line. This made most sense for us. We used the Strangler pattern, we created all of these different things, but most importantly, we kept our monolith. This monolith, we were going to just keep there and hack away at it. We weren't going to just replace it with like a cliff edge. We needed to, we weren't confident in what the application actually did to be able to 100% say, yes, we're going to rewrite this first time and it's going to be perfect. There was going to be problems. With a live system, you can't really do that. Now, there is some interesting things, because we're a digital agency. We don't build products and systems like this too often. We do Umbraco websites. It's just a CMS. It's really, really simple stuff. This was a steep learning curve for our dev team, and we learned a lot from it. We had never really done Xamarin before. A few of us had played around with it, but we decided this was the right technology from our research, and I truly believe that we made a good decision there. We'd never really done microservices. Again, we'd heard about them and read about them and maybe kind of done them, but never done it in anger, and this was a big learning curve for the team. Azure Functions and API gateways were relatively new when we were starting this. At the kind of peak of this project, of our dev team of 10, I had 6 of the developers working on this project. We scaled it up from it being me to 6. I insisted that every single person, when they started, spent a half day reading the microservice implementation journey blogs, because, as I said, they will change your life. Please read them. There's a link in a minute. We had to redefine our process a bit. Project managers are kind of used to the fact that, dev does some work, and then they push it to a staging environment, and I test it, and I put it in front of a client, and they say, yeah, it's all good, and it goes to maybe another environment, and then it goes live, and that just wasn't going to cut it here. That was way too slow for the kind of stuff we needed. We had to change how we were going to work. We actually found by using a microservice approach rather than this massive code base, with 6 devs working on it in a quite small team, we were working faster. People could work in isolation. We could decide that's not the right technology for this. We're not going to use an Azure function, or we are going to use an Azure function. This is a better way of doing it. Our documentation had to get better, because if it wasn't good enough, we couldn't onboard all of these devs and we couldn't explain some of the concepts and the work that we were doing. So we have like a big intranet that we put project information on, and we had to start putting more diagrams and things in there to properly explain to not only the business but the developers and the client why we're doing things a certain way.
How did you split up the work? Did one dev
So
end up all in one microservice? Or?
Kind of, but by accident. We work in a Kanban style, so we have a board with tasks on it, and you pick them up and you pull them off. Traditionally, one of those tasks would have been a service or a feature on a service. So someone just takes whatever is kind of top of the backlog when they come to it. With a team of 6 working on only 3 services, it was pretty much people working on the same sort of stuff. We visually documented a load of stuff because there was a lot of dependencies here. Not only do we have the web app, but we have the mobile app, and we have an iOS and an Android app there, and we have different review processes for some of these. Like an iOS app has to actually go through 2 sets of review for us to get it to production, and then we had all the other services as well. So this map became massive once we mapped it out, but it made it far more understandable for a project manager for me to be able to say, like, the release is there right now, and point to it. They didn't really understand the concept of microservices, so, and they didn't need to. We would just say we're going to deliver the functionality and it's going to work, but we have a couple of different things we need to do to get it there. So the documentation really helped. The reading I mentioned, this microservice implementation journey, it will change your life. There is, I think, 8 parts now. Please read those, they're brilliant. JSON specification I didn't specifically mention, but our API endpoints were all JSON. We used a consistent syntax across everything because we needed predictability. Strangler Pattern and Applications by Martin Fowler and also Microsoft, both great articles. Read them if you're interested in how to do all of that. I've not credited, this is Arim Kukia. He's a Microsoft MVP, and that's a really good set of articles, so please read them. Before I finish up, I have to plug this, because this is my conference, the Umbraco UK Festival. We're in our 9th year now. It's actually our 10th year, but it's our 9th event.
Does Niels come to these?
Does Niels come?
Mm.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I wish I had a picture of it. I do. He is here.
Yeah.
So Niels is the founder of Umbraco. It's a 2-day celebration of all the things in the Umbraco world. We have .NET stuff. We're still looking for speakers on non-Umbraco topics as well. If you're up for submitting something, it's on the website now, umbracofestival.co.uk. Just come along, learn. We've got headless CMS stuff. We've got kind of mobile development topics. We've got a ton of different stuff, and we've got a coupon code. So for Leeds people, Leeds 25 will give you a 25% discount on the ticket. It's umbracofestival.co.uk. It's the 8th and 9th of November. We have workshops. We have everything you could probably want from a conference. So
Where is it?
London.
Miles away.
Miles, sorry. Sorry. It's London. It's in the Barbican Centre. We last year did it in they've got like a tropical garden, so we did it outside in outside in their tropical garden. It was really cool. And it's just a lot of drinking, to be honest. It's got a lot of educational value too. Please come along. And with that, thank you for listening to me mumble for an hour or so. I'll take any questions.
I've got 2 questions. You said earlier that unit testing became a first-class citizen. Are you implying that you had 100% code coverage then?
I don't think we had 100% code coverage. That is a very strong claim. But wherever we were writing something complex, it had to have a unit test. We have a thorough code review process. Those kind of things get caught. If there's something we can feasibly unit test, it should be unit tested.
Cool.
I don't know what kind of percentage code coverage. That's maybe a good thing for me to check.
Second question then, you being the Umbraco expert, how far off is Umbraco.NET Core?
It's minimum 2 years.
Any other questions?
Did you version your APIs, or did you literally just replace that one more? It doesn't work, take it down and go.
So unless we were changing schema, no, the APIs weren't versioned. So if the underlying services or services that it was calling didn't change the end result, then or the input, we wouldn't change them. We did have to version one of the APIs. There was one thing we introduced later on that needed to be adjusted. In fact, it was the authentication system. When we swapped that out and started using JWT tokens, JOT tokens, previously they were using some horrible like XML based token and it wasn't going to work, so we had to have two versions for you to authenticate with different tokens, and then internally we used JOT tokens. Yeah.
I've got a quick question. Do you know when you created the app in Xamarin
Mm-hmm.
and then you said you released it to iOS? Did you get into many hurdles releasing it to the other ones? I know there can be a bit of a
Oh yeah,
pain.
yeah.
What kind of things did you have to do?
Well, the bigger things were just iOS apps have to be signed in order to actually release them, and in order it was just complicated. You have to have all the kind of relevant certificates and stuff. You have to have a Apple developer account to get it all working.
It's a bugger.
Yeah.
Always takes me a day.
Yeah,
Doesn't matter.
minimum.
And then I learn it, and then I do it 6 months later, and I've forgotten
Forgotten
it.
it.
And it takes me a day again.
We were using App Center, which is Microsoft's Xamarin, like Visual Studio Team Services thing, automatic builds and stuff. And we were like, oh great, just click download. Got an Android app, it works brilliantly. Go to install the iOS app. Oh, it's not opening on my phone. Oh, the App Store's rejected it because it's got like a ridiculously large files in there that aren't used or something. It's like, what the hell is this thing even doing if it's trying to automatically build our app? I thought it was meant to make it easy. It didn't. I have no idea how companies like Facebook can go, oh, we've screwed something up, here's a quick bug fix. Like the App Store approval process is a nightmare. I think that's maybe where we were stung most, just on approval. They didn't like some of our code, or some of the code that was generated by Xamarin, and then getting it running on people's devices.
And in terms of updating your app once it's on the store, is that quite easy once you're
That was kind of easy. Well, easier than launching it in the first place. As we were doing it semi-regularly, once or twice a month, then we kind of got used to it. But like you say, if we skip 6 months later, I don't think I could do it right now. I'd forget. Yeah. The guy behind the... Yeah.
Could you please put the slide on the meter group?
Yes, the slides will go on the meter group. Don't worry. Yeah.
Did you use Xamarin Forms?
Yes, we use Xamarin Forms.
Does it actually work?
So,
That's a serious question.
yeah, it does work. We had some interesting things because at the time we were developing this, the iPhone 10 came out with the notch, and suddenly we'd gone from these kind of uniform screen sizes to this overly stretched screen size where we had a load of real estate we couldn't do anything with. So we had to build a UI that was going to scale somewhat. Similarly, on an iPad, we wanted it, instead of stretching, we wanted it to be constrained in the middle, and there was quite a lot of conditional stuff we had to build in order to get that to work. I think another thing, we tried where possible to avoid installing a ton of libraries because it was going to just make the app huge and heavy. At the time, there wasn't really a decent animations library for Xamarin Forms. There is now Xamarin Forms animation, but the designers were a bit frustrated that the app felt a little bit like, like rigid because it wasn't hugely interactive. It's changed now, but at the time that was a bit of a challenge up front.
Did you have experience going cross-platform with them?
Did we have a difficult experience?
What's that?
Did we have a difficult experience going cross-platform? Did you say?
What was that like?
Something would work on Android, something would work on iOS. We've in our. I wish I had the code on me. We have like a base Xamarin app and then platform-specific projects. So those are the ones that actually get built for when you want the iOS app or the Android app. They build the individual ones. They contain. I think they both use different color systems. So when we had a different thing to convert like hexadecimals to the different color system for iOS and Android, and one time one of the colors came out completely different, and that was really interesting. So yeah, there's some platform specific stuff that we had to combat. Other than that, pretty straightforward. Yeah.
So just quickly on from that, if you started that, if you took the project on again tomorrow, would you still take a hybrid approach, or would you like take that steep learning curve of Swift and Java?
We're a .NET team. I stand by the decision that we made. I think Xamarin was the best technology for us. Yeah, you'll come up against some things that are a little bit painful, but I think we've learned from them, and yeah, next time there won't be an issue. So no reason not to.
It's
It's better than dealing with both of them. Yeah. Sure.
So
So what's the one thing that you know now about Monolith to microservice that you wish you would have known at the beginning? The one thing that is maybe the most important thing, or you know,
it's a tough question. I would say at the start we should have been more willing to iterate faster. So yes, you've got this application that you're nervous about and you don't necessarily fully understand, but just go for it. We spent a long time making sure, it's working, it's all okay. And yeah, we caught some stuff, but I think had we just gone for it, we would have found things a hell of a lot quicker. And it also gets the team used to working in this kind of faster paced way. Before, where we do a code change and push it through 5 environments to get it to the place we need it to, it's just not going to cut it in a microservice world. It's like fix, do the change, it goes to production kind of thing. So yeah, kind of iterate quicker up front. Last question? We'll take the last 2 questions. Yeah?
Instrumentation and logging. What did you do with that?
So we used, we've heavily used Azure App Insights for all of our logging. The API gateway assigns a session ID to every single request, and we pass that along to all of our services. So for any given transaction, we kind of know where it started, where it ended, and we can stitch it back together.
Should you use Stackify?
Sorry.
Just
Stackify is great as well.
Get our sponsors in.
Yeah, but we're using App Insights. Final question?
Did you meet your Christmas deadline?
No, we didn't. This app ended up being launched in March and didn't go into the 5 hospitals. And like I said, the SSL broke on Christmas, so that's like a mini Christmas present. That's the closest we got to doing anything by Christmas, fixing the SSL. It took a lot longer, and it cost a hell of a lot more than planned too.
Always does.
Always does. Kind of fourfold more than planned. So yeah. Thank you very much.